Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the differences in morphology and syntax when it comes to the Korean and English languages. In this presentation, I have three main subjects that I'm going to focus on when comparing the two languages: morphological language type, word order, as well as articles and particles. Starting off, when it comes to linguistics of the two languages, English has a few articles, whereas Korean is the language of particles. English only has two articles, those being the as well as a and an. An is an indefinite article and is used for referring to generic or non-particular members of a group, such as the example here being a dog is barking, signifying that the dog barking is not known or that there is not a specific dog in mind. When we compare this to the Korean delimiter topic particle un는, in a similar sentence, we can see that 개는 짖는다 is used to refer to a dog's generic bark, this one meaning as for the dogs, they bark. Looking back at English, the article the is used in a more specific or definite manner. So the example, the dog is barking, signifies that the dog is known and there is a certain dog that is barking. Again, comparatively in Korean, 이가 is used in the sentence, 개가 짖는다 signifies a similar thing, meaning that a certain or specific dog is barking. However, this is only scratching the surface of Korean particles, even when just looking at the usage of 는 and 이가. This chart shows just how reliant the Korean language is comparatively to English on particles. These are a few of the particles that are more commonly used in everyday sentences and vernacular. However, the Korean language actually has 128 particles. But as you can see here, Korean uses things like topic, subject, and object particles to make in sentences so that the grammatical meaning is conveyed. And English grammar is heavily reliant on word order and doesn't have the markers that Korean has. Another difference in the two languages is word order. English order is subject, verb, object, whereas Korean order is subject, object, verb. However, this is mainly default as the particles we saw earlier actually allow for scrambling, which we will discuss in a minute. First, I wanted to look at English. With this example sentence here, we can see that Sophia likes flowers follows the subject, verb, object order. This can't be moved around, like for instance saying likes Sophia flowers or Sophia flowers likes. This being the case, we can see that English is more reliant on word order for things to make grammatical sense. With Korean, we can see there isn't a heavy reliance on word order, but rather the particles are what make the sentences grammatical. Both 소피아가 겉을 좋아한다 and 소피아가 좋아한다 means Sophia likes flowers. The particle markers allow the language to scramble and still be coherent. However, if the particles were omitted and the words were unmarked, then the subject, object, verb would be the default. So you couldn't say 겉 소피아 좋아한다, but you could say 소피아 겉 좋아한다. Moving on, the morphological language type is not something we've really covered in class, but I find it pretty interesting. English is considered to be a moderately analytical language, whereas Korean is considered an agglutinative language. So an analytical language is a language that uses separate and distinct units to convey relationships between words with word order and auxiliary words, such as prepositions and articles being used to convey grammatical relationships between words. Pure analytical languages or isolating languages don't use affixes. However, English does use affixes and has root words paired with these affixes, as well as prepositions, postpositions, particles, and modifiers. This is why I said that English was only moderately analytical and not purely analytical. As for Korean, it is an agglutinative language, which means that it strings morphemes together, such as word root stems and affixes to convey meaning and grammatical relationships. So for Korean, you'll see that a lot of the language is determined by tacking on a suffix, whether that be to convey honorifics, plurality, tense, command, questions, and a bunch of other things. Agglutination Although it does occur in English, it's not the primary way the language puts together morphemes to make sentences. But to put it into perspective, what agglutination is, the word anti-disestablishmentarianism is composed of 6 morphemes, with the word established being the only free morpheme of the 6. In the Korean language, instead of words like this, rarely used long noun, the affixes in Korean are used more regularly and convey things like tense. This chart here actually shows those differences in tenses when it comes to an agglutinative and analytical language. Korean has these suffixes like also, aso, o, ul 거예요, but English uses more auxiliary words like does, did, will, could. Even though theoretically there are suffixes like d, ed, ses to convey things like tense, in analytical languages, these distinct units or auxiliary words are going to be used instead of suffixes. Again, we can see this difference in the morphological language type as the affixes and suffixes are just tacked onto the Korean word, but English tends to need more units or words to convey the same thing. So in conclusion, English and Korean are very different, not only in things like word order and particles, but in their whole morphological language type. Korean ability to scramble words with the help of particles is just not something that English has the capability to do in the same way. Whilst analytical languages can have some agglutinated words, the language as a whole is just not as reliant on affixes in terms of morphological structure. This has been my presentation on the differences in Korean and English morphology and syntax. 감사합니다.